The communication chamber aboard the Zelani station buzzed with quiet desperation. Ambassador Keithan stood before the massive transmitter array, his pale green hands shaking as he prepared to send what might be his people's final message to the galaxy. Around him, other Zelani worked frantically at their stations, their large eyes wide with fear. "Begin transmission," Keithan said, his voice barely above a whisper. The holographic display flickered to life, showing his image being broadcast. Across dozens of star systems, Keithan took a deep breath and began speaking to any civilization that might be listening. "This is Ambassador Keithan of the Zelani Federation. We are under attack by the Krek swarm. Our colonies are falling one by one. We have lost contact with 17 worlds in the past 2 cycles. Please, if anyone receives this message, we need help. We are a peaceful people. We have no weapons of war. We have always believed in harmony and growth, but now we face extinction." His voice cracked as he continued. "Yes, the Kreks show no mercy. They destroy everything in their path. Our defensive shields cannot hold much longer. Our evacuation ships are not fast enough. We offer our entire scientific database and all our resources to any civilization willing to help us. Please, we are running out of time." The transmission ended, and Keithan slumped into his chair. Around him, the other Zelani continued their work in silence. They had sent similar messages for days now, but no one had responded. The galaxy, it seemed, was too afraid of the Kreks, swarmed to risk helping the peaceful Zelani, 3 sectors away. The human exploration vessel New Frontier drifted through space on a routine mapping mission. The ship was smaller than most Galactic vessels built for long-range exploration rather than comfort. Its hull bore the scars of numerous encounters with space debris and cosmic storms. Captain Jake Morrison sat in his command chair, reviewing star charts when Communications Officer Ben Parker suddenly straightened at his station. "Captain, I'm picking up a distress signal," Ben said, his fingers dancing across his console. "It's coming from the Zelani sector." "Put it through," Jake ordered, setting aside his datapad. The bridge fell silent as Ambassador Keithan's desperate plea filled the air. Jake listened without moving, his dark eyes focused on the main screen. When the message ended, he looked around at his crew. Navigator Lisa Chang was already pulling up stellar maps. "Sir, the Zelani sector is about 4 days away at maximum speed." Chief Engineer Carlos Rivera spoke up from his station. "Captain, we don't know anything about this Krek swarm. Could be dangerous." Medical Officer Amy Brooks turned from her console. "The message said there are peaceful people facing extinction. You can't just ignore that." Jake stood up and walked to the main view screen, staring out at the stars. His crew watched him, waiting for orders. They had been together for 3 years, exploring the outer rim of known space, making first contact with new species, and mapping uncharted systems. They were used to danger, but this was different. This was war. Ben scanned for any other responses to that distress signal, Jake said finally. Ben worked at his console for several minutes before shaking his head. "Nothing, sir. Oh, no one else is." Answering their call, Lisa set course for the Zelani homeworld. Maximum speed. "Sir," Carlos said, standing up from his engineering station. "The New Frontier isn't a warship. We have basic defensive systems and some mining charges, but nothing that could stand up to a real military force." Jake turned to face his engineer. "Carlos, when you joined this crew, what did you think we'd be doing out here? Exploring, making contact with new species, advancing human knowledge," Carlos replied. "And when we find new species in trouble, what do?" Carlos was quiet for a moment. "We help them." "Exactly. Amy, contact Fleet Command. Tell them we need backup, but don't wait for orders. We're going to help these people." Amy nodded and began composing the message. Jake returned to his chair as the ship's engines came online. Through the view screen, he watched the stars shift as they changed course. Captain Lisa said from her navigation station, "At current speed, we'll reach Zelani space in 96 hours. "Good. Carlos, I want you to go over our defensive systems, see what we can do to improve them. Ben, start monitoring all communications from the Zelani sector. I want to know what we're walking into." The next 3 days passed quickly. The crew worked around the clock, preparing for whatever they might find. Carlos and his engineering team modified their mining charges into crude torpedoes. Amy reviewed everything in their medical database about Zelani physiology. Ben intercepted dozens of increasingly desperate messages from Zelani colonies under attack. On the 4th day, the New Frontier dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Zelani system. What they saw made the entire bridge crew fall silent. The Zelani homeworld of Verdania hung in space like a green jewel. But it was surrounded by the wreckage of destroyed ships. Massive alien vessels, dark and angular, moved between the debris. Like predators, these had to be the Krek ships. My God, Amy whispered. Look at the size of those things. The Krek's vessels were enormous, easily 10 times larger than the New Frontier. Their hulls were covered in weapon ports and armor plating. They moved with purpose, ignoring the smaller Zelani evacuation ships that fled past them. Captain, Ben said, his voice tense. I'm reading at least 30 Krek's vessels in this system alone. They've got the planet completely blockaded. Jake studied the tactical display. The Krek ships were positioned to prevent any escape from the planet's surface. Several orbital stations were already destroyed, their burning hulks creating a ring of debris around Verdania. Lisa said quietly, Maybe we should wait for backup. Jake watched as a small Zelani transport tried to break through the blockade. 3 Krek's fighters peeled off from the main fleet and destroyed it in seconds. He thought about the message they had intercepted, about Ambassador Kithen's desperate plea for help. No, he said finally. We're going in. Ben, open a channel 2. The nearest Zelani station. Captain, that's suicide, Carlos protested. We're one small ship against an entire fleet. Jake looked at his chief engineer. Carlos, what's the first rule of being human? Carlos sighed. Never leave someone behind who needs help, that's right. Now everyone to your stations. We're going to save some people. The New Frontier began moving toward the planet. It's small, formed dwarfed by the massive Krek's vessels around it. On the bridge, the crew worked with quiet efficiency, each person focused on their task. They were afraid, but they were also determined. Jake Morrison had never backed down from helping someone in need, and he wasn't about to start now. The Zelani had asked for help, and humanity was going to answer that call, no matter what the cost. As they approached the first Krek's patrol, Jake wondered if the peaceful Zelani had any idea what kind of species they had just called for help. Humans had spent their entire evolutionary history fighting to survive on one of the most dangerous planets in the galaxy. They had learned to be predators, to hunt in packs, to never give up when someone they cared about was in danger. The Krek swarm was about to learn. What happened when you threatened something that humanity had decided to protect? And the galaxy was about to discover what Deathworlders were truly capable of when they answered a cry for help. The New Frontier slipped through the outer edge of the Krek's blockade like a shadow. Captain Jake Morrison kept his eyes on the tactical display as his ship moved past the massive alien vessels. The Krek ships were so large that they barely noticed. The small human exploration craft were getting close to the main Zelani orbital station, Lisa Chang reported from her navigation console. It looks like it's still operational. Ben, open a channel to the station, Jake ordered. Within moments, the face of Ambassador Kithen appeared on the main screen. The Zelani looked exhausted, his large green eyes filled with despair. When he saw the humans, his expression changed to confusion. Who are you? Kithen asked.
Art.
Are you here to evacuate our people? I'm Captain Jake Morrison of the human vessel New Frontier. We received your distress call. We're here to help. Kithen stared at Jake for a long moment. The human was smaller than a Zelani with no visible armor or natural weapons. His ship appeared to be designed for peaceful exploration, not warfare. I appreciate your response, Captain Morrison, but I'm afraid there's nothing you can do. The Krek swarm has over 30 warships in this system. We need military assistance, not a single exploration vessel. Jake smiled, and something about that expression made Kithen uncomfortable. Ambassador, with respect, you don't know what humans are capable of. We'd like to dock with your station and discuss the situation. Kithen was about to refuse when alarms began sounding throughout the Zelani station. His communications officer called out in panic. Ambassador, 3 Crick scout ships are approaching the station. They'll be in weapons range in 5 minutes. Kython turned back to the screen. Captain Morrison, you need to leave immediately. The Krecks will destroy any ship that comes near our station. It's not going to happen, Jake said calmly. Lisa, move. Us between the station and those Krex ships. Carlos, bring our weapons online, sir. Carlos replied. Weapons are ready. Kython watched in amazement as the small human ship positioned itself directly in the path of the approaching Krex vessels. The 3 scout ships were each twice the size of the New Frontier, bristling with weapons and armor. Captain Morrison, what are you doing? Kython asked. You're going to get yourself killed? Ben, put me on an open channel to those Krex ships, Jake ordered, ignoring the Zelani ambassador. Channel open, sir. Jake stood up from his command chair. When he spoke, his voice was cold and deadly calm. Attention, Krex vessels. This is Captain Jake Morrison of the human ship New Frontier. You'll turn around and leave this area immediately. The lead Krex scout ship responded with a harsh, grinding voice. Small ship, you have 10 seconds to move, or we will destroy you. Jake looked at his crew. Lisa had her hands ready over the navigation controls. Carlos was monitoring the weapons systems. Amy had moved to a secondary console to help coordinate their response. Ben was tracking the Krex ship's movements. 5 seconds. Small ship, the Krex commander growled. Fire, Jake said quietly. What happened next shocked Ambassador Kython and every Zelani watching from the station. The human ship moved with impossible speed, dodging the first Krex energy blast while simultaneously launching 3 missiles. The weapons weren't military torpedoes, but modified mining charges that Carlos had rigged with proximity sensors. The first Krex scout ship exploded in a ball of flame and debris. The second ship tried to turn away, but Lisa had already calculated its movement pattern. The New Frontier spun around and fired another volley, destroying the second vessel before it could escape. The third Krex ship managed to fire its weapons, but the energy blast passed harmlessly through the space where the human ship had been a second before. Lisa had already moved them to a new position, and Carlos launched their final missile. The third scout ship joined its companions as wreckage. Floating in space, the entire engagement lasted less than 30 seconds. Ambassador Kython stared at the display in complete silence. Around him, the Zelani bridge crew had stopped working to watch the impossible scene. 3 Krex warships had just been destroyed by a single small exploration vessel. Ambassador, Jake's voice came through the communication system. We're ready to dock whenever you are. 20 minutes later, Jake Morrison and Amy Brooks walked through the airlocks onto the Zelani station. Ambassador Kython was waiting for them with a small group of Zelani officials. The humans were even smaller in person, barely reaching Kython's shoulder. They looked fragile compared to the tall, plant-like Zelani. Captain Morrison, Kython said, still trying to process what he had witnessed. How did you destroy those? Ships so easily, Jake shrugged. We've had a lot of practice dealing with hostile forces. Dr. Brooks here would like to examine your wounded, if that's acceptable. Amy stepped forward, carrying a medical kit, studied what information we in. Have about Zelani physiology. I might be able to help with your injured people. Kython led them through the station corridors. Everywhere they went, Zelani stopped to stare at the humans. Word of their arrival and their destruction of the Krex scouts had spread quickly through the station. Captain Kython said as they walked, I must ask, what kind of weapons were those? Our sensors couldn't identify the technology. Modified mining charges, Jake replied casually. Carlos rigged them with basic targeting systems. Nothing fancy. Kython stopped walking. You destroyed 3 warships with mining equipment. We work with what we have, Jake said. The key is knowing how to use it effectively. They reached the medical bay where dozens of wounded Zelani lay on treatment beds. Ami immediately went to work, scanning the injured with her medical tricorder, and beginning to treat their wounds. Her movements were quick and efficient, and she showed no reaction to the severity of some of the injuries. Dr. Brooks, one of the Zelani medical staff, said, How do you know so much about treating trauma wounds? Amy looked up from a patient she was treating. Humans have been dealing with injury and violence for our entire evolutionary history. We've gotten pretty good at patching people up. As Amy worked, Jake and Kythan discussed the tactical situation. The Zelani ambassador explained how the Krex had appeared in their space 3 weeks ago, destroying everything in their path. Krex didn't seem interested in conquest or resources. They simply destroyed any civilization they encountered. They've already eliminated 17 of our colonies, Kythan said. Our people are completely peaceful. We've never developed weapons. Of war, we don't even understand the concept of organized violence. Jake listened carefully, asking questions about Krex tactics and technology. As they talked, more alarms began sounding throughout the station. What now? Kythan asked, moving to a communication panel. Ambassador, the voice of the stations. Sensor officer came through the speaker. A large Krex fleet is approaching. 20 ships, including several heavy cruisers. Kythan's face went pale. Kythan Morrison, you need to leave immediately. Your ship can't possibly stand against that. Many vessels. Jake looked at the tactical display showing the approaching Krex fleet. The ships were massive, each one capable of destroying the entire Zelani station with a single volley. Any reasonable person would retreat and call for backup. Instead, Jake smiled again. It was the same expression that had made Kythan uncomfortable earlier, and now the Zelani ambassador understood why. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a predator that had just spotted its prey. Ambassador, Jake said, walking back toward the airlock. You might want to move your people away from the outer sections of the station. Things are about to get interesting. Captain, you can't seriously be planning to fight 20 warships with one exploration vessel, Kythan protested. Jake paused at the airlock door. Ambassador, humans have a saying. Yeah. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. Amy, finish up here and get back to the ship. As the humans prepared to leave, Kythan grabbed Jake's arm. Why are you doing this? You don't even know us. We have nothing to offer you that's worth risking your lives. Jake looked at the Zelani ambassador with those strange human eyes. For a moment, Kythan saw something in that gaze that made him step back. It was the look of something that had spent millions of years climbing to the top of the food chain on a world that tried to kill everything that lived on it. Ambassador Jake said quietly, You called for help? Where I come from. When someone calls for help, we answer. It's just what we do. With that, the humans returned to their ship, leaving Kythan and his people to watch from the station as the new frontier moved to intercept 20 Krex warships.
Ow.
The Zelani had no idea that they had just witnessed their first encounter with a species that the galaxy would soon learn to call Deathworlders. The new frontier moved through space toward the approaching Krex fleet like a tiny fish swimming toward a school of sharks. On the Zelani station, Ambassador Kythan and his staff watched their sensors in horrified fascination. It was so small compared to the Krex vessels that had barely registered on their long-range scanners. This is madness, whispered Dr. Velen, the station's chief scientist. That little ship can't possibly survive against 20 warships. Kythan said nothing, but he found himself thinking about Captain Morrison's strange smile. There had been something in the human's eyes that he had never seen before. It wasn't fear or desperation. It was something much more dangerous. It was confidence. Aboard the new frontier, the crew worked with calm efficiency. Jake sat in his command chair, studying the tactical display as the Krex fleet grew larger on their sensors. The enemy ships were arranged in a standard attack formation, with the smaller vessels protecting the larger cruisers. Distance to target? Jake asked. 2 minutes to weapons range, Lisa reported from navigation. Captain, they're not even trying to avoid us. It's like they don't consider us a threat. Good, Jake said. Carlos, are our surprises ready? Systems green, Captain, Carlos replied from engineering. The modifications are holding steady. Amy looked up from her medical station. Jake, I'm reading massive energy signatures from those ships. Their weapons are at least 10 times more powerful than anything we have. Then we won't let them use their weapons, Jake said simply. Ben turned from his communications console. Sir, the Krex are sending us a message. Put it through. The bridge filled with a harsh, grinding voice that seemed to come from something that had never learned the meaning of mercy. Human vessel, you will surrender immediately or be destroyed. Your interference with our hunt will not be tolerated. Jake stood up and walked to the view screen. The Krex fleet was now visible as dark shapes against the stars, growing larger with each passing second. Ben, open a channel to the Krex fleet. Channel open, sir? Jake's voice was calm and steady when he spoke, but there was something underneath it that would have made any human listener step back. Krex fleet, this is Captain Jake Morrison. You have attacked peaceful people who asked for help. You've destroyed colonies full of innocent families. You've made a very big mistake. The Krex commander laughed, a sound like metal scraping against stone. Small human, your single ship cannot harm us. Prepare to die. You're right about one thing, Jake said. We are small. But you know what? Sometimes the smallest things are the most dangerous. He nodded to his crew. Execute attack pattern Alpha. What happened next would be talked about in Zelani military academies for generations to come. The new frontier suddenly accelerated to impossible speeds, moving faster than anything the Krex had ever encountered. The human ship dove straight into the center of the Krex formation. Weaving between the massive warships like a minnow swimming through a reef, Carlos had spent the last 3 days modifying not just their weapons, but their entire ship. He had rerouted power from non-essential systems, overcharged their engines, and turned their cargo bay into a weapons factory. The mining charges were just the beginning. The first Krex cruiser exploded when the new frontier attached a modified fusion reactor to its hull and detonated it from the inside. The second ship fell to a swarm of tiny drones that Carlos had built from spare parts and mining equipment. Each drone carried just enough explosive to punch through the Krex armor at specific weak points that Lisa had calculated from their earlier encounter. But it wasn't just the weapons that shocked the Zelani observers. It was the way the humans fought. They moved like they were a part of the ship itself, each crew member anticipating what the others needed before they asked. Lisa plotted courses that seemed impossible, making the ship dance through space in ways that defied physics. Carlos monitored dozens of systems at once, keeping their overcharged engines from exploding while managing their improvised weapons. Amy coordinated damage control and tactical analysis while monitoring the crew's vital signs to make sure they could keep fighting. And through it all, Jake orchestrated the battle like he was conducting a symphony of destruction. He never raised his voice, never showed panic, never hesitated. He simply gave orders in that same calm tone, and his crew responded instantly. Lisa, bring us around to the port side of that cruiser. Carlos, prepare the plasma charges. Amy, target their engine core. The Krex fleet, which had been expecting to overwhelm a single small vessel, found themselves fighting something they had never encountered before. The humans didn't fight like any species the Krex had ever met. They didn't mass their forces or rely on superior firepower. Instead, they moved like a pack of hunters, striking at weak points and disappearing before the Krex could respond. Within 10 minutes, half the Krex fleet was destroyed or disabled. The remaining ships tried to retreat, but the humans had anticipated this. Lisa had already calculated their most likely escape routes, and Carlos had seeded those areas with mines built from spare parts and leftover explosives. The battle ended when the last Krex ship exploded in a ball of plasma and debris. The new frontier hung motionless in space, surrounded by the wreckage of 20 enemy warships. On the Zelani station, nobody spoke for several minutes. Finally, Ambassador Keithan broke the silence. Get me a communication channel to the human ship. When Jake's face appeared on the screen, he looked exactly the same as he had before the battle. His hair wasn't even messed up behind him. His crew was already back to their normal duties, as if destroying an entire enemy fleet was just another day at the office. Ambassador, Jake said pleasantly, the immediate threat has been neutralized. We're eating several more Krex fleets in nearby systems. With your permission, we'd like to dock and discuss the overall strategic situation. Keithan could only nod. An hour later, he found himself in the station's main conference room with the 4 humans, Dr. Velen and several other Zelani officials had joined them. They all seemed afraid to speak. Amy was treating minor injuries on her crewmates with the same calm efficiency she had shown while treating Zelani patients. Carlos was sketching modifications for the station's defensive systems on a datapad. Ben was monitoring communications from across Zelani space, tracking the movement of other Krex fleets. Captain Morris and Kythan began slowly. I need to understand what we just witnessed. How did you destroy 20 warships with a single exploration vessel? Jake exchanged glances with his crew. Ambassador, I think it's time you learned a little bit about where we come from. Amy looked up from her medical work. Jake's right. They need to understand what they're dealing with. You see, Jake continued, humans evolved on a planet called Earth. By galactic standards, Earth is what we call a Class 12 death world. Dr. Valen leaned forward. I'm not familiar with that classification. It means, Carlos said, not looking up from his sketches, that our home planet spent millions of years trying to kill everything that lived on it. Natural disasters, poisonous, atmosphere, deadly weather, and creatures that saw us as food. Ben added, for most of human history, if you weren't tough enough, smart enough, and mean enough to survive, you died. The ones who lived long enough to have children passed those traits on. Amy sealed a small cut on Lisa's arm and continued the explanation. Humans are persistence hunters, Ambassador. We're designed to track our prey across vast distances and never give up until we catch it. We can run for days without stopping. We can go without food or water longer than most species. We heal faster from injuries that would kill other beings. But more than that, Jake said, we learn to work together. Humans are pack hunters. We form bonds with people who aren't even related to us, and will die to protect them. When we decide someone is part of our group, we'll fight the entire universe to keep them safe. Kythan stared at the humans in growing understanding. You're saying your entire species evolved to be warriors? Not warriors, Jake corrected. Survivors. We'll do whatever it takes to protect the people we care about. And right now, that includes you and your people. Dr. Velen spoke up nervously. How many more of you are there? Lisa smiled for the first time since they had arrived. Earth has about 8 billion humans, Doctor. Wow. And when they find out that someone has been attacking peaceful people who asked for help, well, let's just say the Krex are going to have a very bad time. Jake stood up and walked to the conference room's viewport, looking out at the debris field that had once been a Krex fleet. Ambassador, you sent out a call for help? You probably expected other peaceful species to offer you sanctuary or defensive technology. Instead, you got us. He turned back to face the Zelani officials. The thing is, when humans hear that innocent people are in danger, we don't just offer to help. We show up with everything we have, and we solve the problem. Permanently. Why? Kythan asked. You don't know us? We have nothing you need? Why would you risk your lives for strangers? Jake looked at his crew, and they all smiled. It was the same predator's smile that had made Kythan uncomfortable, but now he understood it differently. It wasn't the smile of something that wanted to hurt him. It was the smile of something that wanted to hurt the things that had been trying to hurt him. 3 days after the battle at Verdania, the human fleet began arriving. Ambassador Kython watched from the observation deck of his station as ship after ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel. They came in groups of 5 or 10, each formation, different from the last. Some were sleek and fast, others were massive and heavily armed. All of them moved with the same deadly purpose he had seen in the New Frontier. How many ships are coming? Dr. Velen asked, standing beside Kythan at the viewport. Admiral Sullivan's message said 200 vessels, Kythan replied, still hardly. Believing the number, or calling it the Third Expeditionary Fleet? The lead ship was a massive vessel called the Titan's Hammer. When it docked with the Zelani station, Admiral Kate Sullivan came aboard with a team of human officers. She was a tall woman with gray hair and eyes that seemed to see everything at once. When she shook hands with Kythan, her grip was firm enough to crack bone. Ambassador, she said in a voice that had commanded fleets across a dozen star systems. I understand you have a pest problem. The main conference room had been expanded to accommodate the human command staff. Kython found himself sitting across from Admiral Sullivan, Captain Morrison, and a dozen other human officers. Each one looked calm and professional, but there was something underneath their polite manner that made the Zelani nervous. Colonel Frank Hayes spread out a holographic map of Zelani space. Red markers showed the locations of Krex fleets, while blue dots represented human forces. We've identified 17 major Krex battle groups spread across 11 star systems. Total enemy strength is approximately 400 vessels. 100 ships, Dr. Velen whispered. How can you possibly fight against so many? Lieutenant Commander Danny Walsh looked up from his datapad. Doctor, the Krex have numbers, but they're not very smart about how they use them. They bunch up their ships and rely on brute force. That makes them predictable. Admiral Sullivan activated another section of the map. We've been monitoring their communications for the past 72 hours. The Krex don't use encryption because they've never needed to. They'll always overwhelm their enemies before strategy matters. Captain Morrison leaned forward. But humans have been fighting other humans for thousands of years. We've learned a few tricks about warfare that the Krex have never seen. Pilot Officer Rachel Kim added. Their ships are big and heavily armed, but they're also slow and clumsy. They can't maneuver like our vessels can. Kython listened to the humans discuss the upcoming battle like they were planning a hunting expedition. They spoke casually about tactics that would involve the destruction of hundreds of enemy ships and the deaths of thousands of crew members. What disturbed him most was that they didn't seem to enjoy the prospect of violence. They approached it like any other job that needed to be done. Admiral Kython said, "May I ask why you're doing this? Your government could have simply offered us sanctuary. Why risk so many of your people in a war that isn't yours?" Admiral Sullivan was quiet for a moment, studying the tactical display. When she spoke, her voice was soft but carried an edge. That made everyone in the room pay attention. Ambassador, 3 weeks ago, the Krex attacked a convoy of refugee ships from the Altair colonies, mostly families with children, fleeing from a solar flare that had made their worlds uninhabitable. The Krex destroyed every ship. 2,000 people died, including 800 children. The room fell silent. The human officers all had the same expression on their faces, a cold anger that seemed to fill the air around them. The thing is, Admiral Sullivan continued, we have a rule about people who hurt children. We hunt them down, and we make sure they never hurt anyone again. Ever. Colonel Hayes activated another section of the tactical display. The Krex aren't just attacking your people, Ambassador. They're working their way through this entire sector, destroying every peaceful civilization they encounter. They've wiped out 6 different species in the past year.
So you see, Captain Morrison said, this isn't just about helping you. This is about stopping something that needs to be stopped. For the next 2 days, Kython watched the humans prepare for war.
What he saw changed his understanding of what these creatures were capable of. They didn't just plan to fight the Krex. They planned to hunt them. The human ships spread out across Zelani space in small groups, each one moving toward a different Krex fleet. But instead of attacking immediately, they began what they called harassment operations. They would strike at Krex, supply lines, destroy their scout ships, and then disappear before the main fleet could respond. Lieutenant Commander Walsh led a squadron of fast attack ships that specialized in what the humans called hit-and-run tactics. They would appear at the edge of a Krex formation, destroy several ships, and vanish before the enemy could react. The Krex would send pursuit ships, but Walsh's squadron was always gone by the time they arrived. Sergeant Lucy Ford, trained volunteer. Zelani in basic defensive tactics, though she had to modify human combat techniques for beings who had never learned to fight. The key, she explained to her confused students, is to think like your enemy. What would you do if you were trying to attack this position? Then you make sure those approaches are covered. Meanwhile, Communications Officer Ben Parker worked with Zelani technicians to intercept and decode Krex battle plans.
They're getting
frustrated, he reported to Admiral Sullivan during one of the daily briefings. Their commanders are starting to make mistakes. Dr. Amy Brooks had established a field hospital on the Zelani station and was treating wounded from both sides of the conflict. When she worked on injured Krex prisoners, She showed them the same care she gave to Zelani civilians. This confused the Krex, who had never encountered an enemy that healed their wounded. "Why do you help us?" one injured Krex warrior asked her. "We are your enemies." Amy looked up from the medical scanner she was using, because that's what doctors do. They help people who are hurt regardless of who they are. The Krex warrior stared at her with something that might have been confusion. "Your species is very strange." "Yeah," Amy said with a slight smile. "We get that a lot." But it was Captain Morrison who showed the Zelani what humans were truly capable of when they decided to end a threat. He led a small task force deep into Krex territory, targeting their main supply depot. The facility was protected by 50 warships and was considered impregnable. Morrison's ships attacked at night, using the shadows of a nearby asteroid field for cover. They planted explosives throughout the depot while the Krex slept, then withdrew to a safe distance. When the charges detonated, the explosion was visible from 3 star systems away. 50 Krex ships were destroyed instantly. More importantly, the Krex lost the fuel and ammunition they needed to continue their advance into Zelani space. 3 entire Krex fleets were forced to retreat to find new supplies. "How did you know they would be sleeping?" Kythan asked, when Morrison returned to the station. "Most species have regular sleep cycles," Morrison explained. "We studied their patterns for a week and timed our attack accordingly. It's basic predator behavior. You watch your prey until you understand their habits, then you strike when they're most vulnerable." As the days passed, the Krex fleets found themselves being picked apart by an enemy they couldn't catch. The humans never fought fair. They used ambushes, traps, and misdirection. They attacked supply lines instead of meeting the Krex in direct battle. They turned the Krex's own aggression against them, leading enemy ships into asteroid fields and gas clouds where their larger vessels couldn't maneuver. Most disturbing of all, from the Krex perspective, was that the humans seemed to know what they were going to do before they did it. Every Krex battle plan was countered before it could be implemented. Every retreat route was blocked by human ships waiting in ambush. "It's like they can read our minds," one captured Krex commander told his interrogators. The truth was simpler and more terrifying. Humans had spent thousands of years learning to hunt other humans who were just as intelligent and cunning as they were. The Krex, for all their size and ferocity, had never faced an enemy that could think like they did. Admiral Sullivan stood on the bridge of the Titan's Hammer, watching as the last major Krex fleet retreated from Zelani space. Around her, the human task force maintained perfect formation, ready to pursue if the enemy tried to return. Admiral, her communications officer, reported, "We're receiving surrender requests from 3 different Krex fleets. They want to negotiate." Sullivan looked at the tactical display where red enemy markers were disappearing from the map one by one. The Krex had entered Zelani space with over 400 ships. Now fewer than 60 remained operational, and those were fleeing as fast as their engines could carry them. "Tell them they can surrender," she said finally. But they surrendered to the Zelani, not to us. And they never come back to this sector again. The war that the Zelani had thought would mean their extinction was over. It had lasted 2 weeks, and the humans had won it without losing a single ship. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when someone made the mistake of threatening people under human protection. 2 months after the last Krex ship fled Zelani space, Ambassador Kython stood in the rebuilt council chambers of Verdania. Around him, representatives from dozens of galactic civilizations listened as he prepared to deliver his report to the Galactic Council. The room was filled with beings from across known space, all eager to hear about the new species that had emerged from the outer rim. "Honored delegates," Kython began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber, "I stand before you today to speak about humanity, the species that answered our call for help when no one else would." Counselor Thresh of the Vakari Union leaned forward in his chair. "Ambassador Kython, our intelligence reports suggest that this human fleet destroyed over 300 Krex vessels in less than 2 weeks. How is this possible? The Krex swarm has been expanding unchecked for 5 years." Kython activated a holographic display showing the battle records from the war. "Counselor Thresh, the humans didn't just defeat the Krex, they hunted them. Every engagement was planned and executed with a precision we had never seen before." Representative Zara of the Centauri Collective stood up. Ambassador, we've reviewed the tactical data you submitted. Some of these battle plans seem impossible. How did they predict Krek's movements so accurately? Kythin replied. Humans have been fighting wars against their own species for thousands of years. They've learned to think like their enemies, to anticipate their moves, to turn their strengths into weaknesses. Dr. Velen, who had accompanied Kythin to the council meeting, added his own observations. What you must understand is that humans evolved on what they call a death world. Everything on their planet tried to kill them, so they learned to be killers in return. But they're not mindless predators. They're intelligent hunters who work together in ways we've never seen. Counselor Zenth of the hegemony spoke with obvious skepticism. You're describing a species of warriors. How do we know they won't turn that aggression on peaceful civilizations? Kythin thought about his time aboard the human ships, watching their crews work together with such perfect coordination. He remembered Admiral Sullivan's calm professionalism, Captain Morrison's protective instincts, and Dr. Brooks' compassion for enemy wounded. Because, he said finally, humans have something that pure warriors lack. They have empathy. They form emotional bonds with other species. Once they decide you're a part of their group, they'll protect you with their lives. The chamber erupted. In whispered conversations as delegates tried to process this information, finally the council speaker called for order. Ambassador Kythin, what do the humans want in return for their assistance? Territory? Resources? Trade agreements? Smiled, remembering his conversation with Admiral Sullivan after the war had ended. They want our friendship. They want to share scientific knowledge. They want to learn about our cultures and teach us about theirs. They want nothing more than what any peaceful species would want. That's impossible, declared Counselor Thresh. No military force provides assistance without expecting payment. Then you don't understand humans, Dr. Velen interjected. They have a concept they call doing the right thing. They help people because helping people is what they believe they should do. Representative Zara looked at the battle data again. Ambassador, these humans destroyed an entire invasion fleet. What happens when they decide we're their enemies instead of their friends? The question hung in the air for several long moments. Finally, Kythin spoke. Then you pray that you die quickly. The silence that followed was deafening. Every delegate in the chamber understood the implications of what they had just heard. A species that could casually destroy the Krek swarm was now active in galactic politics. Meanwhile, on the bridge of the New Frontier, Captain Jake Morrison read through the latest communications from Earth. The Galactic Council had formally requested a meeting with human representatives. Several species had asked for defensive alliances. 3 different civilizations had requested human military advisors. Looks like we've made quite an impression, Lisa Chang said from her navigation station. Maybe too much of an impression, Amy Brooks added, looking up from her medical reports. Some of these messages sound more like surrender requests than diplomatic overtures. Jake set down the datapad and looked out at the stars. The New Frontier was currently patrolling the border between Zelani space and the former Krek's territories. Making sure no remnants of the swarm tried to return. Ben, any word from Admiral Sullivan about our next assignment? Communications Officer Ben Parker checked his console. She wants us to respond to a distress call from the Rigel system. Apparently something called the Blood Fleet is attacking. Mining colonies there? Carlos Rivera looked up from his engineering station. Blood Fleet. These aliens really need to work on their naming conventions. Jake stood up and walked to the main view screen. In the distance, he could see Zelani ships moving through space freely for the first time in months. Children were returning to the colonies that had been evacuated during the war. Families were reuniting with loved ones they thought they'd lost forever. Lisa set course for the Rigel system. Maximum speed. Sir Amy said, "Don't you think we should wait for backup? We don't know anything about this Blood Fleet." Jake smiled, and his crew recognized the expression. It was the same look he'd had when they'd first heard the Zelani distress call. Amy, when has that ever stopped us before? As the New Frontier jumped to faster-than-light travel, Jake thought about the report he'd received from the Galactic Council meeting. The other species were afraid of humanity now. They saw humans as unstoppable warriors who could appear anywhere and destroy any threat. They weren't wrong. They weren't entirely right either. Humans weren't conquerors or destroyers. They were protectors. They were the species that answered. When someone called for help, regardless of the cost, back on Verdania, Ambassador Kythen concluded his presentation to the Galactic Council with a warning that would be remembered for generations. Honored delegates, humanity is unlike any species we have encountered. They are capable of violence beyond our comprehension. But they use that violence only to protect those who cannot protect themselves. They ask for nothing in return except friendship and the chance to learn from us. He paused, looking around the chamber at the worried faces of the galactic representatives. But let me be very clear about something. The humans who saved my people were explorers and scientists. They were not soldiers. Earth has 8 billion humans, and most of them have never left their home system. What we witnessed was just a tiny fraction of what humanity is capable of. The implications of this statement rippled through the chamber like a physical force. If a single exploration ship could destroy 3 Krek scouts, and a small fleet could eliminate an entire invasion force, what could the full might of humanity accomplish? However, Kythen continued, I have spent months among humans, and I can tell you this. They are the most loyal friends and the most protective allies any species could ask for. As long as you never threaten innocent people, you have nothing to fear from them. He activated one final holographic display, showing human ships patrolling the borders of Zelani space. They call themselves the guardians of those who cannot guard themselves. They are Deathworlders who chose to use their deadly skills to preserve life rather than destroy it. The galaxy is a safer place because humanity has joined it. The council session ended with more questions than answers, but one thing was certain. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted forever, light years away. The new frontier dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Rigel system. Captain Morrison looked at the tactical display, showing several dozen ships attacking defenseless mining stations. Well, team, he said to his crew, looks like someone else needs our help. Behind him, his crew prepared for battle with the same calm efficiency they'd shown dozens of times before. They were human, and when innocent people called for help, humans answered. The Blood Fleet was about to learn what the Krek swarm had learned, and what every future threat would learn. When Deathworlders decide to protect you, nothing in the universe can stand against them. And somewhere in the vast darkness of space, other species in trouble were beginning to understand that they were no longer alone. When the monsters came for them, there were bigger monsters standing ready to fight. Back the age of human protection had begun.